Hi, I'm Dr. Scott Conkright. What if your body is holding memories your mind can't access? We are here. I'm here with my friend Matt Tomatz, and I am excited because Matt and I go back a
A
decade.
long time,
We were on
15 years.
through the American Group Psychotherapy Association, being on the well, you weren't on the open sessions. I was on the open sessions committee, and you were on the workshop committee, and then you ran the whole thing at one point, right?
We were cousins.
Yeah, there you go. Say more about yourself. I mean, I know that I'm especially interested in people knowing about your music connection. You and I talk a lot about, especially classical music, and I've seen several concerts and talk about music a lot and about how affect and music and shame all come together, especially around the education of music, especially for musicians, for performers.
Yeah. Well, Scott, it's great to be here with you and to do this. We've had, of course, many conversations, but none of them recorded. So
Recorded,
we'll
right?
see what happens today.
We'll come back to it, but I'll tell the listeners that we were talking about. I can't remember the author's name, the author of The Rigor of Angels.
Oh, yeah, I was just looking that up.
I can't remember
That's
his name.
William Edgington.
Eggington?
Eggington, I guess.
Eggington, yeah.
Eggington.
Eggington, yeah. Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Very British sounding. And about how he combines literature, Borges in particular, the South American writer, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, and Einstein, and others, and how Kant. That was an interesting thing. I've always thought Kant was a stuffy sort of person. I remember The Prolegomena to Any Future Metaphysics. It was a tiny little book on my dad's shelf, and I kept looking at it and trying to read it as a kid. Of course, I couldn't read anything. I just thought the name was cool. And then I remember getting into college and having to read some Kant and going like, this guy can't write for shit. This is like absolutely impenetrable stuff. And then when Eggington describes him, apparently he was quite a dandy. He loved dinner parties. He liked to dress up. He liked to wear nice clothes, and he was quite popular. Like, I mean, everybody was reading him. But apparently, he was also, you could set your watch to him, like when he was going for a walk, like every morning.
What was it like to see that book on your dad's bookshelf or on his nightstand? I asked because my father was a big reader, and I think I had different feelings, at different times around what books were there. Or some thought of, oh, I should read that. And we had some big tomes on our bookshelves of Shakespeare and philosophy. And
Likewise, my dad got his doctorate degree in, I think it was culture. I think it was education, but with an emphasis on cultural anthropology. So that's how he ended up in Africa for his research. So he had a lot of anthropology books, and there's lots of discussion about anthropology, sociology, psychology, and so forth growing up at the dinner table. My mom got her master's in curriculum development, and so she was in education as well. She was a high school principal here in Atlanta for 20 years. But the books were always intimidating, because they were both enticing,
yeah,
but I was looking at them and, when I was 5 or 6 or 7 and going, cool, this is really cool. I want to read these. And so read a bunch of other stuff. And then eventually when I was able to read, when I started getting into college level reading, no, maybe it was actually in high school, because that's when I started reading Kierkegaard and people like that. But I didn't read his books yet. And so it was aspirational. I don't know, what was it like for you?
Yeah, I think very similar. I remember those books as a kid feeling like, oh, there's something in there that I'd like to know or I should know. And, but, way over my head as a 10-year-old or something like that.
Right. But there were secrets in there that I wanted.
Yeah, but there was something like, oh, there's more to life than I'm I'm knowing here. And I think it was in college, in particular Shakespeare. I really got invested in reading Shakespeare plays, and then I could start to crack those books a little bit and understand that I could participate.
That's interesting. I was very interested in poetry starting in uh, eighth grade and up, and that was a big passion of mine. Still is. My parents never really liked poetry, and they didn't really go to plays. They didn't go to classical concerts like yours. I mean, your father was a musician, but he listened to a lot of classical music. So my first album I remember, and I think I still have it, is Haydn's trumpet concertos and flute concertos, which I'm sure you're very aware of.
Well, I played the Haydn trumpet concerto, studying as a trumpet player. But it's interesting. My father was a professional musician and professor, and for him, listening to music was not a background activity. There would be something that would compel his attention if music were on. So we actually had a surprising lack of listening to music in our house. That wasn't the biggest sort of shared activity. But we went to a lot of live music. I went to many concerts that he played or were part of the university. And then when I was in high school, we were in Houston, Texas at that time. So we'd go to the opera together or
how nice. Yeah,
to the symphony, and really started to take in classical music.
That's a fascinating thing that maybe some people don't realize, is that if you do it professionally or if you have a certain type of ear for attention, we were talking about attention earlier, talking about a different book, which we may come back to, you can't ignore it. So like for instance, when I even go to Kroger and they're playing the Rolling Stones or they always have some sort of background music on, it feels intrusive to me because my attention goes there without my wanting it to go there. It's like, why is this music on? I'm trying to pick out vegetables right now. I don't need to be listening to this music. And so it divides my attention up. And so people who do professional music don't have it on in the background. None of my musician friends, there's never music. They're either playing music or listening to it live.
Yeah, I think if it's in the background, it becomes a distraction in some way.
Yeah.
So, in the car, it was more like we'd listen to NPR together, and then we'd maybe talk about whatever story we heard or think about politics or something.
Yeah, let's go back to the issue of attention, and that's maybe a lead in as well to affect theory, affect relational theory, and shame, and the archetypes that I'm creating right now. But the issue of attention is such a big one. And we started this before recording. You said that you'd finished the
calculation of
on the calculation of volume number 1. Which, how would you describe it? I mean, how would you the most simplest way to say it is that this woman wakes up in France with her separating from her husband to go to they have a company together where they buy rare books or something like that, and she goes off and then wakes up and finds out that it's still the same day that she left, and that keeps
I think it's billed as a science fiction book, which isn't quite how I would categorize it. She's repeating this day for an entire year. And I would say it's sort of an exploration of consciousness, like what happens in our minds. And in that, there's beautiful descriptions of their relationship. It's a love story. It's a death story in ways as things end, in terms of how they're held as precious. And it's also just a story of detail, speaking of attention, because in living the day over and over, she's able to listen to the subtleties of sound and experience in a way that we can't pick up unless it's repeated, or unless maybe you're in a very particular form of attention.
Yeah, that's what you finished it. I think I said I'm like 2/3 of the way through, so no spoilers. I think I kind of know where it's going, but and it's going to be lovely no matter what, lovely and probably painful no matter um, what I'm taking away from it right now is just her incredible ability to describe indirectly through detail about physical things, the sound of a spoon, the sound of this happening, the rain coming down at a certain time and repeating and so forth, how attention is everything, in terms of how you feel. And so what she paid attention to informed her feeling world, it informed her affective world. And so she described it like almost like a 360 in some ways, not quite like that, but so many different angles in which she was able to describe the same day over and over again. And it's so beautifully written. And as he said, I think the word you used was sparse. And it's almost Hemingway-ish.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, and I wonder though, affectively, if that sort of points to states of mind, and there's a state of mind that's receptive to detail, to experience, to being clear, and how often our states of mind are polluted right now because there's so much going on in terms of noise, digital noise, and just the many layers of thought that we all have going on now, stories.
Yeah, and the 24/7 news cycle, it's unending. And like I said, like the music at the grocery store, the music at the restaurants, having to play the restaurant managers, listen to the restaurant managers, playlists, volumes that I don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And it feels intrusive, and it takes my awareness away from what's going on inside my head.
It's one of the reasons I like going to live music, because it's just such a vivid moment of being present and listening and working with attention to absorb it, and then watching the musicians who are playing long pieces and having to point their attention to that.
And you mentioned the piece that you saw the other day, the Takash Quartet, is it?
Yeah, Takash Quartet played the Schubert Quintet, which is a quintet for two cellists, or I think sometimes it has a bass in it. But so it's a monumental piece. It's 55 minutes long.
Well, that's a long-ass piece of music for classical music.
Yeah, and they just, they're such... they're able to hone this moment together that draws people in and keeps you listening. It was really wonderful.
Well, I remember going to Carnegie Hall with you, what, a month or two ago?
Yeah.
And they were just amazing. I mean, I was really, really impressed. This level of being able to meet some of them afterwards as well. The thing that I'm curious about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on, is how attention informs how you're feeling, especially in intimate relationships, whether that's parent-child, romantic couples, colleagues, friendships, and so forth. One of the things that I'm doing with the archetypes, and just let me give a brief overview of that real quickly so people are a little bit informed about what I'm talking about, is that my work on affect, taken from Sylvan Tompkins' original research and writing, is that I've taken his work, especially around shame, and have taken, how do I best put it? I'm going on the hypothesis that shame in childhood is the main determiner of affective styles. That is yet to be tested because I don't have a lab and I don't have a budget, but I've read a lot, and I think it fits. That insofar as that the parent, caregivers, and just life in general, get in the way of connection. And every kid, as you know, you raise kids as well. You raised a kid. Is it up until about 11 or 12 or something like that? You are everything. They want your interest and they want your enjoyment. Every enjoyment and interest come from you. And there's always going to be times where you're going to have to say, shame in a healthy way, it is time to go to bed. You can't do this. You can't do that. You have to socialize these kids for them to be healthy and exist in this society. Shame has to be metabolized in some ways. And so even the healthy shame. But if there's toxic levels of shame, which I'm also saying there was way too much toxic shame in our culture, in our parenting, in our teaching. By the way, we've talked about this when it comes to music education, performance, as I did with Robert Spano as well. Um, it it has to it has to get metabolized, usually in ways that distort one's awareness. Is what I'm saying. So what I did, thank goodness for ChatGPT. One of the healthy things that comes from ChatGPT is I could put tons and tons of research, tons and tons of data, Tompkins and attachment people, and said, hey, let's come up with some archetypes based on the various ways that 8 different ways that I think that Chim can get metabolized. And so uh, that's what I got. I'm going to soon have the e-brochure for people to download and possibly a book coming out. I hope. So what I'm also saying is that depending on how you feel shame and how you deal with it, you're going to listen to the other and respond to the other in different ways. So and your ability to connect with others is going to be affected by that. Your ability, your heart, essentially, is how I'm putting it. Either is really open. So in this archetypal configuration, I know I'm very much the puppy. I'm eager to connect. I'm sometimes maybe overly eager to connect, and sometimes don't have as much spine as I need to, or certainly didn't growing up. So got hurt in that way and misunderstood people's having more spine than me, and saying, no, I need more distance, or I need to titrate me. We all need to dose each other in various ways. And so I think earlier in my life, I didn't dose very well. I didn't read people accurately in terms of their needing space. And so felt hurt by that.
Mm.
So another real popular or common archetype is the cat, which is, you can just imagine, cat just says, yeah, I'll play for as long as I want to play, and then I'm going to go away. And don't chase after me. Like I just told you, I'm done playing. That's a common pursuer distancer dynamic that you see.
I was so I've got three main thoughts. They all take a while to unpack, but I'll start here.
Okay, go for it. I'll be
yeah,
quiet.
I was just visiting a friend of mine who has a new puppy. This puppy's kind of big for itself, right, and grew quickly, and it's super shaggy, and I would qualify it as beautiful and lovely, and also just kind of a mess because it'll run in the mud and then come up to you and then run away and come back. But there were also times where this puppy would like settle a little bit, and it was just like pure love. It was just there to be received and wanted to be a part of it. So sometimes it's puppy enthusiasm, and sometimes it's puppy of like just reminding us to love and or to just totally rest. Like a puppy, just when it's tired, it's just gonna go rest. And it's beautiful, right? Just this sleeping young dog. So I think there's something in the model to think about of like the complexity of these characters.
Yeah, well, puppies. I think most kids are puppies. I mean, there's various variations. I mean, having raised a couple kids at various times, you see it. I'm sure as you did too on the playground. Some kids are more wary and so forth, especially by.
Yeah, this is great because this blends into another piece and where shame can come in, and to tie it to music a little bit. So you asked a while back what I do, and one of the things I do in my work as a therapist is to work with musicians, and I work mostly with professional musicians and students in training, so college and graduate students who are pursuing classical music or jazz, sometimes other forms. And there are so many stories in that world, as well as in people who have left music, of being shamed because their enthusiasm for things or their idea or their expression isn't treated with like, let's modulate this so maybe it fits the form. It's treated with shame. And those moments are so painful and poignant that they make people shrink and freeze. So in terms of attention, I think partly what that points to for me and as performers is allowing ourselves to be in a state of mind that's vulnerable and to have vulnerability in our interpersonal connections, which we'll oftentimes maybe want to avoid for different reasons. And so I see that as a big part of my work with musicians, is trying to help alleviate shame, not by sort of just saying it's okay, or thinking of it in the framework of how shame can help us regulate our behavior. In other words, if we're doing something that's shameful, but can actually be a stance of connection, and how we need that when we're performing in any way, whether that be performing as a musician or as a teacher or as a partner. And I don't mean performance is performative. I mean that as doing a function and being present.
Well, the Takashi Quartet was really good about that. I mean, they're very animated, and they clearly love what they do, or at least give that impression. I have the sense that they truly do. But I love
with each other and with the audience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're connected to each other and they're connected to the audience, and through that, the music is alive.
Yeah, it does bring the music closer to one's heart, in mind at the same time. Like you're hearing it through some of their movements. I'm especially thinking of the woman, I forget her name.
That's Harumi Rhodes.
Yeah, she's lovely. She's very animated and very expressive in her face, and really brings the pieces. It allows me to hear the music and see it and image it in a different way. But yeah, the shame, I think, just shame of the type that you're talking about does narrow the bandwidth of enjoyment. It can then take away interest as well. Interest as an affect, in that it now becomes a chore. Now, and the enjoyment of it gets diminished.
Yeah, and so much energy going to blocking connection, blocking interest, because there's some defense. And dogs do that too. Speaking of dogs, right? Like dogs can be easily shamed and sulk off. So we can see that posture of shame.
Yeah, they do the slump of shame, and they do that big doggy eyes thing, like if it's time to leave the park and they don't want to leave, and they're of like, why are you doing this to me? This feels awful. Like I want to stay here. And they're the only animal I know that I know of. I mean, cats don't do the slump of shame, that I know how to read at least. But certain dogs do it pretty well. And I think it's a normal feeling, and that's one of the things I'm trying to teach is shame on a continuum. Trying to do a couple things. One, that shame is normal and natural, and it's in response to any hindrance to the positive feelings that we have of interest being one of them and enjoyment being the other one. And that it's got a healthy function, but it's also on a continuum. So a lot of people don't think of disappointment as shame.
Yeah.
But if you have lots and lots of disappointment in a relationship, and it's almost the example I thought of the other day is like microplastics, like it just builds up, they're just kind of like almost under the radar until they accumulate. And so you have these relationships intimate relationships, especially romantic relationships, where at the very beginning, of course, full of interest. The other person is the most interesting thing in the world, and that's where you get all your enjoyment from. And it's very much like the parent-child relationship in the early 5-6 years. And then I also use the metaphor of of love being a garden. So everybody goes to Home Depot and they buy all these plants, water it, tend to it, and all that, and then they go inside and watch TV for 3 months and go back out to the garden and wonder why it's all dried up, because they haven't put in interest and enjoyment like they normally did. And then in between as well, there's tiny little disappointments, whether that's coming in from work or you're waiting for your partner to come in from work and they're on their phone or you're on your phone and they don't look up or they just don't really talk to you or they go, huh? What do you want to do? Nothing. I'm just going to read. No conversation. So this, you sort of learn to live with these tiny little disappointments until finally you say, I'm not happy with this.
Yeah, and there's such risk in that too, of opening up to the vulnerability of being disappointed again, because it's probably going to happen.
So I think it's really important to understand in relationships that, one, I need to back up and say the only time you ever see pure affects is in an infant up till about age 2. So all the 9 affects, they're in pure form as a baby. You see it on the face. You actually see shame in infants. When they can't reach something, they'll do that little slump of shame.
Yeah.
But, everything's interesting to them. So like it only takes a millisecond for them to find something else to be interested in. So boom, off they go. Distress, anger, fear, you see all that. By the time they're 2 and you add language in around 2.5 or so, around that, roughly that area, they all get blended together. They're rarely in pure form. The sadness is disappointment and distress and lots of other things combined. So I think of like a color palette. So you're mixing these things in, and there's just thousands of different colors that have different meanings.
One of the reasons I like The Calculation on Volume, this book about repetition of the same day, is there were periods of that book, because the character knows there's only that day, that the attention could be fully on whatever the activity is.
Yeah.
And I hear you saying that about our relationships. Like our relationships, our conversations, we need to be present. And time gets in the way of that, which is a big part of this book. If there's no time or there's a rift in time, it's this fantasy, then we could be somehow different in our minds and our attention. But gosh, modern life, people are busy and their minds are busy. So we can easily go into distraction, which then can be felt as shame. They don't want to talk to me, or they're too busy, or they're in their phone, or whatever that is.
Yeah, that's one of the things that you and I have done pretty well, especially when we make time to have Zoom meetings, usually every other week or so, and that's always delightful, just to keep up and have these type of conversations. But when we for the audience, we do a 2-day workshop, what's called Institute, where we're training other group therapists together. So we've been doing that. I think we've done it 3 times or 4
times, yeah.
Now. Yeah. And make sure that we have time during the week to spend a lot of time together and just chat. And so the other day, Logan, a friend of mine who's my conductor friend, for that Hamptons music festival, is here in town. And so we went to the botanical garden, and I think around 3:00, and just wandered around, had a glass of wine at sometime around 5, and then snack. And then I don't live that far off. So we walked back here, hung around, I think we had another glass of wine. Then we went and got a bite to eat. And then we came back and I think talked until like 11:00. And it's such a rarity to have somebody's time for that amount of time. And it's a different type of discussion.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I think we find each other really fascinating and fun and interesting. And we have good conversations, just like you and I do. And so it's always a delight, but what a rarity to have such a chunk of time.
Yeah. And if one of the components of shame is disconnection, then one of the healing elements would be to give ourselves those sorts of experiences.
And we don't. Yeah. Shame gets in the way of connecting. So these aren't phones. It's easier to get distracted and find out like what's going on in the news, and momentarily, you can go down the rabbit hole of news and everything else, or whatever else is on Instagram or TikTok, and never stay with your feelings, and thus you're not listening to the important signal of shame in your body.
Mm-hmm.
the folding sort of feelings. And that's one of the things I'm trying to describe right now is the various degrees of shame, what I'm calling the shame dial. I'll throw a couple of them out and see what you think. I think at the lowest level.
Let me just say one thing before you do that. One thing I think you're really trying to do that I've appreciated is trying to essentially normalize shame and not shame. And if that happens, then it gives us a whole lot more room to have open, honest dialogue with each other, because we can work with the feelings that are present and engage around that and stay present and, develop our relationships. But otherwise it has to stay on a certain surface level. And, we get locked into shame or avoidance.
Exactly. No, thank you, Matt. That's exactly, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Over the last 3 years, in trying to write my book or variations of the book, the biggest obstacle has been the word shame. It's clearly loaded. I can't bring it up without somebody saying like, I don't feel shame. I don't feel shame any longer. Well, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the biological basis of shame as a signal.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about, so I make the difference between affect shame and emotional shame, which emotional shame is your history of shame. So if we have a culture that from the very beginning, our parents generally didn't like us to feel ashamed. It made them look bad,
And like you said, disappointment, it's thought of as a really terrible thing. Don't disappoint your parents. Don't disappoint your teachers. And so it becomes a tremendous allergy.
Exactly. Right.
Disappointment.
Right.
Avoidance.
And as kids, we learned that failure is a super bad thing. So why be vulnerable in terms of learning?
Yeah.
Because to learn anything means you're going to fail a lot. It's one of the struggles I've had learning the piano. Because
that's how you learn, right?
Screw up all the time.
Yeah, nobody learned to walk without falling at least once.
Yeah, right? Oh,
right.
You don't fault a kid who's learning to walk for falling down, but by God, by the time they're in first grade,
yeah,
that's all gone.
Yeah,
that is all gone.
That can show up in so many forms of education.
And then, as you've pointed out, and others, Robert and Logan and others point out, that music education for performers is just toxic. It even goes back to like what do you call it? Rapping somebody on the knuckles with a ruler, for not doing the keys, not doing it right.
That used to be a way that people were trained to, if they were left-handed, to write with their right hand too, right?
Isn't that horrible? Just hard to like music, hard to like learning anything if you're punished for it. I mean, if it's difficult. So one of the nice things I found about Instagram and social media, especially YouTube and Instagram around educational stuff, is that I thought in college, in high school and college, that I actually understood math pretty well. I'm numerically dyslexic, so I can't add things without inverting numbers, which is a major annoyance to anybody around me because I can't write down phone numbers accurately half the time.
Don't do your own taxes.
Oh yeah, no, I'd be in jail if I did my own taxes. No, I guess not going to happen. I'll just add zeros or subtract them or whatever. But no, I couldn't pass college algebra because I thought I understood it, but I keep failing the exams. They wouldn't let me use a calculator in those days. But now I've gone back and I keep coming across these wonderful videos on calculus, on physics, and all these other things, which I thought were way beyond me to be able to understand. I don't quite grasp some of the math of it quite yet. But I understand the concepts because you know what? Because they visualize them for me. They show it in a circle. They show like in.
But you're linking this to shame. Shame you probably felt as a student.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Who wants to do math? If you fail everything,
if you flip numbers, right?
It's so. If you don't have tutors, if you don't have people who can encourage you during the tough parts of it, when you have to go home and perhaps your parents didn't know math or didn't know calculus or algebra or didn't know this or didn't know that or didn't care. It was just your job to push yourself through it. Many people don't have the perseverance, and they shouldn't be judged for that. But it takes a certain type of perseverance.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but interesting, going back to the books on my dad's and my parents, I should say, bookshelves, is that was very aspirational, as I said earlier. But it also helped push me through that. Is that I was determined to be like my parents, to be educated in that way, how much they valued that.
Right.
You know?
Well, we need that model. You needed that model. Yeah. I also wanted to a little bit separate, but think about guilt a little bit. Because I kind of hear you talking about, well, I remember this model, I'll have to look up who the person was, that spoke about there not really being such a thing as guilt, that guilt is more of a fact. You're guilty or not guilty, but that we have a whole range of feelings of shame that would also apply towards these value or moral metrics. So, in other words, what I just want to get at, I'm not sure if that made sense, but is that we may be guilty of something. And it's important to own that, to apologize, to take action. And if we get into toxic shame, we get locked into immobility and hiding. And important to elevate that into something that's workable in some way, something that we can address.
Right. Well, as I understand guilt at this moment, things are always changing in terms of my formulation of these things. I think of it in terms of more behaviors and consequences and more rule regulated, but very shame based, of course. But if you then go from this behavior of mine, I'm guilty for not having done this or followed through on this, or I caused X, Y, or Z to people I care about, or did something, or did a moral. It's often a moral infraction or infraction of a rule. If you go from that behavior to it's a sickness of the soul, that there's something wrong with me as a person, that's chronic shame syndrome as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm thinking about with some of your original questions is if you do something against a moral code, or you do something you're guilty of, then there'd be a feeling attached to that.
Yeah, it should be.
And that's, in some ways, that we could think of that in the spectrum of shame feelings that we then could address. Or we could avoid it, in which case it just gets sucked into this depth of avoidance and, more toxic shame.
I'm going to take that back to relationships. I feel like when people make vows of whatever sort, whether they're marriage or not, or if you make a commitment to somebody in any intimate relationship, part of the commitment needs to be to maintain the two positive affects of interest and enjoyment. And if you don't, you're guilty of not maintaining the relationship.
Wouldn't that be interesting if that were in wedding vows?
Yeah.
I pledge my interest in my excitement, in my enjoyment, in my joy. Let's cultivate that together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I worked for the Guthrie Theater when I was 19 as assistant dramaturg, I did that for a couple of years. I got to meet a lot of interesting people. One of them was Jessica Tandy and Hume Cronin, the actors, driving Miss Daisy. She was also, I don't know if he was in it, but she was in Birds. She was the mother in Birds.
Uh-huh. Okay. Oh yeah. Wow.
I mean, both of them worked a lot of theater and a lot of movies together. And when I had dinner with them, with some other people one evening, and they were just delightful because what they would do is they would journal. For every play or movie that they did together, they would journal about the characters and how those characters were in some ways related or not to their relationship. How could they put themselves into that and learn from it about their relationship? And I thought, wow, that is cool. So So they kept their interest and enjoyment of each other up, not only by working together, but by doing this journaling and sharing that with each other. And I thought, what a lovely thing.
Yeah, it speaks to your garden metaphor too,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Of
Yeah.
what is the action and activity for any given couple to maintain interest and enjoyment? Because at some point it needs to show up as activity, even if it's, I don't know, staring at each other in the eyes or holding hands.
Right. And so that's one of the fun things that's come out of the archetypes is that they, I'm shocked at how I'm surprised at how accurate they're turning out to be. In terms of like the puppy and the cat and the sheepdog, and you know, because they're also just in their like almost like Disney imaginations, like
Mm-hmm.
children's stories and all that. The different couples at the very beginning, whether it's friendship or romantic relationships, there's so much to learn about each other, and there's so much to enjoy. And especially if you found things that you like in common, like we like classical music and things like that, psychology, obviously, things like that. Um, that's easily maintained if you have those activities, and you have a commitment to keep doing those sort of things. So many couples get distracted, and then there's the shame of disappointment, like, oh, they're not in the mood for X, Y, or Z any longer. Then life gets in the way, work gets in the way. They feel like the commitment is not kept up, and so those micro disappointments don't allow the couple to negotiate their differences about how they want to do interest and enjoyment, because that can change over. And also, it's going to be difficult, more difficult. That is, if you start having kids, or you're in a busy career, and all those things that come up. But there has to be a commitment to saying like, hey, I have a sense that you've changed. I'm still interested in you, and I still want to enjoy you. How can I do that with you in ways that you find that enjoyable? And I want you to find that about me.
I love
Because
that. I mean, yeah, the idea that we'd stay the same over our lives and our interests would stay the same. So, what an effort to stay present to our partners and going back to attention.
that's where we're going back to. You also at the beginning you said you had three things that you wanted to say about something, and I wanted to make sure that.
I think it was getting into the shame and the guilt
Okay,
element, and
okay.
uh,
Just want to make sure.
I think when we can similarly in a way when we think about how we can make things actionable or functional or purposeful, then we can grab onto it. Otherwise, it lives in this realm of kind of obscure feeling.
The reason I'm going to come back to the different ways of the dial, of how shame is felt in the body, because I think that again, I want to go back to like the word shame is so shame inducing, you know. So when I first started bringing it up with people, all I would get, whether it was patients or with friends, or colleagues, is they start telling me all their shame stories. It's like, okay, I'm happy to hear them, but that's not really what I was talking about.
Uh-huh.
But that's what conjured up in them is like shame. We almost have a bodily reaction to the word.
Yeah,
So I'm
yeah,
calling it the drop, because
right.
it's the slump of shame. I think is like the lowest level. Like when you miss the bus or the elevator, your shoulders go down a little bit. I do it all the time. I see it in all the people I play racquetball or squash with. They miss a shot, and it's just like a microsecond, then you're back, but you're disappointed that you missed the shot, disappointed that you missed the bus, etc., or that somebody canceled. What a shame that they had to cancel. Isn't that interesting that we say that? The next level up, I call dimming. Is that
Let me say something about that. What it makes me think of is, we talk about attention as though it were singular and on a point, but that's also describing something that sort of speaks to a pendulum, and that in interaction we'll have what feels more connected and vivid, and then moments of distance, and that doesn't actually have to be a problem if we just know that that's how the system works. And it's a problem if we get locked in the disconnect, which we can do by, shame-based thinking or just sort of setting in those feelings or fearing re-engagement. But if we realize, like, oh, I'm kind of over here in the slump, so now it's time for me to bring my attention back or to go toward the person.
So what you want to do is pay attention to what can get interest and enjoyment back up and going. Because one of the things that all the affects do is it brings things into awareness. If all of a sudden the car is swerving towards you and you feel fear, you need to feel that fear because you need the fight, flight, or freeze act. You need to move. Okay.
Well, and you'll feel it before you know you feel it, right?
Right, exactly. And so what I'm also saying is that with shame, the unique thing about the drop is it makes you self-conscious. Everything is flowing in the river of time and you're just floating along. And then you realize your zipper's open or your blouse is your shirt or, whatever, you got a booger sticking out of your nose or something. Somebody points it out. And all of a sudden, if only for 10 seconds, you go, oh, okay, let me get it out of my nose. But you're all of a sudden very self-aware. You're very self-conscious. And the more you go up on the dial, the more painful that self-consciousness is because there's a threat now at higher levels. So if you think of dimming, all the way to collapse, and I'm putting it in physical terms and embodied terms, that if you find out, it's one thing to find somebody says there's Kleenex in your nose and you need to get rid of it like that. It's another thing that somebody says, hey, I want to leave our relationship. I want a divorce. That's a collapse.
Or just to name, since we were talking a little bit about technology, if it's part of the historical record because it's now a picture that's been taken and put out there,
right.
That's a way that we could get locked into shame. So there's avoidance there too. People not going to events or something because they don't want their picture taken.
Right. Yeah, so the public exposure, so there's exposure to yourself. All of a sudden, you're very aware. You have your own inner camera that's now fully on, that's watching you and the other, or watching you and your relationship to whatever goal or task that you have, whether it's passing a test or being in a relationship or whatever, is now fully there. It's usually in a very negative way. Because if everything's running swimmingly, you're not thinking about it. You're just enjoying it. You're just fully in the interest and enjoyment of the other person. Shame, the drop, brings some degree of awareness of what's happening. That's an important thing. It allows you to correct in a relationship. We need that. That's why it's built in evolutionarily, biologically, so we can all get along with each other. Because you need to know if you piss me off, and I need to know if I've pissed you off, or something is happening between us. But it needs to be used in the smallest dose to get whatever amount that dose is to get it done. Okay? Not at the maximum dose, which is what our culture does. So
it also relates to music really nicely, what you're talking about. People want to be in a place of being present, interested, enjoying their expression and sharing that with an audience. But self-referential thinking, whether that be around the micro movement someone is making as a musician, or in terms of sort of forecasting and wondering what others are thinking, are routes towards a freeze response or anxiety, something in that realm. And so it speaks to both having to be prepared and well-trained, but also how do we work with our attention when we're doing something, having a conversation, performing an instrument, giving a speech that helps us point ourselves towards what we want to do instead of what we are self-conscious of.
Well, if you have chronic shame syndrome, it means like you're forever aware. You wake up going, everybody's going to see me, then I don't want to be seen because I'm awkward, because I'm ugly, because I'm stupid, because I'm this, because I'm that. Look at the body image issues. I've had so many patients that said, I never thought about my body until when I was 11 years old. I was at the swimming pool and somebody told me I had fat thighs. And ever since then, I've thought I had fat thighs. And I'm going like 11 years old. I can't, maybe, I don't know. But now that's in their head. Or like, why are you so short? Or why are you so tall? Why are you so this? Why are you so that? that sort of self-consciousness, that's how most people picture shame, is humiliation, embarrassment, awkwardness, not fitting in, being excluded, which that's
Notice
the
how all those thoughts, they don't point people towards what to do, right? They pull people away. It's not moving towards the interest.
Yeah.
So there's this writer, Schechner, who writes for performance studies, which is to study performance, and offers this idea of performance having function, which I really like, because it's something you can work with in terms of what you're trying to do. What is your purpose here?
We'll say more. I mean,
yeah, so he enumerates these functions of performance pretty broadly. They're to entertain, to make something beautiful, to make or foster community, to mark or change identity, to heal, to teach, persuade, or convince, or to deal with the sacred or the demonic.
wow.
So we could say, what are you trying to do? Right. What are you pointing your attention to? Yeah. If you're meeting somebody, that's to make community. It's to foster relationship. So, pointing your energy toward that. If you're on stage, it might be more towards entertainment. If it's in a church, maybe it's about somehow trying to bring people together into the sacred.
Right. No, I love that. I would like to get a reference to that book. I know you send that to me because that sounds like something.
I will. Sure.
Is that an article or a book? I did a book.
It's in different places.
Okay. Sounds like valuable stuff because, when it comes to the shame issue, I think that getting educated around what its purpose is and what our purpose is in relationships and how to feel it in your body and communicate it to people that are important to you. But, to use the word shame makes it too big by just even using that word. Hey, you just shamed me and I don't like that. It's like, right. Oh, no, I didn't mean to shame you. If I just say like, hey, I just dimmed a little bit around that idea because, you didn't seem to groove on it.
That's right. Because shame otherwise and historically is shame on you. And that means you're not welcome. So that's not the intention of what you're suggesting. You're saying, let's welcome and let's work with this. Let's deal with what's going on.
If you're in a board meeting or if you're in you're new to working for Coca-Cola or Delta or something like that, and you're 27 years old and don't have much experience talking in front of a bunch of people, especially bosses and things like that, and you're giving a presentation and the boss says something less than enthusiastic, too many of my patients go into a shame place because they said, well, I brought up this idea and they didn't, obviously I fucked up.
Yeah.
Well, tell me more about that because I doubt if you really fuck up, they would fire you.
Yeah. Okay? So this is so cool, I think, in performance too. If you say something in a meeting or you play something or you do something and then there's a response, there's something in between. There's a pause. There's a gap. And shame can fill that gap almost immediately.
Yep.
It can cause people to slump. And that moment is asking to be open, to be receptive, and to not know what the response is going to be. So it's more of a tennis stance, right? Like you're waiting for the serve. You don't know which way to go. So that you can be responsive to whatever comes. And that actually is a place of feeling a great deal of agency. I can deal with whatever comes. Even if my boss is displeased, it's not a good feeling, but you can work with it.
That's exactly right. And that was very well said. And it goes back to the issue of awareness again, is that if you're in a shame place, if you're dealing with chronic shame syndrome, as they call it, what are you paying attention to? You're paying attention to the awkward self-consciousness of you being in the world with others in a critical way. And that is what primarily your attention is about.
Yeah.
That doesn't allow
The
you to.
antidote isn't necessarily confidence. It's just being open to the gap and then being responsive to what happens and being interested, and that serves people.
Yeah. Well, because if you're so directed at your inner world in trying to manage the pain, the drop pain that you experience all the time, you don't have a whole lot of interest left over for the other person.
Yeah.
It's hard to enjoy yourself and others in that. You're not, because of that, you're almost creating what you don't want. The
Yeah.
other person can't engage with you the way that you want it, so you're not getting the good stuff back. So you're creating the conditions for failure in essence.
So you're suggesting, in some way, be interested in yourself, in your feelings, in your affects, in your sensations that are happening in
Curious
the.
about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we need to wrap up here in a minute, but I'm going to bring up Tompkins as a great, and I think I've sent it to you. If I haven't, I will. I think it's just a couple paragraphs in which he's talking about the need for people to have a healthy addiction to thinking in an inner world,
Nice.
and that addiction. He says what happens is that after formal education stops, most people stop being interested in their inner world and in interesting things in general. And so most of what you see, and this is what happens with social media, it's more about enjoyment, not the interest joy cycle, as I'm putting it, where interest causes enjoyment. If I get done writing, sometimes it's not very enjoyable writing. Sometimes it's not very enjoyable doing the social media stuff that I'm doing because it's a lot of work. But there's enough positive reinforcement in it that there's enough enjoyment that I get it, and then that enjoyment then gets me interested in doing other things. And then in a relationship, you want that interest enjoyment cycle to always be there. And if it's not there, there's a problem. So there's always going to be a certain number of people who lead with one or the other. One of the things I think, and I'd be curious to hear what you think about this, is that our culture, American Western culture, maybe others, because of the system in which we're consumers of digital products now, apps and so forth, it's all about passive consumption.
Mm.
It's about enjoyment. It's not about interest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about keeping that cycle going. And so it's just passive input and distraction.
I think one of the things that's coming up for me is somehow about healing and our work as therapists. And I had some wonderful yoga teachers, and one of whom helped me heal some injuries. And part of that work was where there's a tendency to pull away from the pain, is to find ways in where you're not exacerbating it, but you can bring interest to the whole system around it, how you move, how there is healing possible. And it's like deeply exciting then. So you still have the injury, but there's a way in that is exciting, curious. It brings a lot of life to that.
That's one reason I like group therapy so much, because it's doing that sort of work, especially with other people, takes the shame away from it.
Right.
People get to witness that, and you get to witness people doing that sort of work where you're like, oh, God, I can't believe I talked so much about that. I'm so glad you did.
Well, or the experience of like someone who feels a tremendous amount of shame around something because of their history and their, the way they were taught or something, and then they disclose this deeply shameful thing, and the group says, like, what's the big deal? That's not
damn it,
right.
damn me, because that's what I've been doing.
Right.
Like, oh,
yeah, like, welcome, it's fine.
it happens, like, as you know, a lot in group, and it's a beautiful experience when it happens. It's a good thing. So yeah, try to keep curiosity. I call it cat. I love it how cat is one of the archetypes, but it's also one of the I don't know what you'd call it. I can't think of the name. It sounds almost too gimmicky, but like it's curiosity, attention, and tenderness.
Oh, that's your acronym.
That's my acronym. That's what couldn't find that word all of a sudden.
Well, I like the tenderness. That's great.
I think that's an important part of it, is that we don't. I think the shaming part gets in that prevents us from being tender around what we're feeling.
Yeah.
And being tender towards others too.
Yeah.
You know, especially with men, we're taught toughen these kids up, toughen these boys up, which is badass stuff to do. It's just super toxic.
Mm.
So they don't get tenderness at times. They need tenderness, failure in sports or in academics, or I think women get a fair amount of it as well, but sort of toxic masculinity sort of issues. I see it in...
Well, I think it's where we started in our pre-recording conversation. We were talking how big things are in terms of space, how small things are in terms of particles. And so in one ways I feel tender is like there's a lot we don't know. And so we can be really interested in it, but we also have to be really sort of tender to be open and work with what's showing up.
One of the things as we end here is that I was talking to Robert about this the other day, is that we have whatever we have in front of us. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of agency about how we deal with what's in front of us, but we don't always have a lot of choice about what's in front of us. Whether that's economics or where we are in a relationship with somebody, there's problems to solve. But in terms of solving the problems, CAT is the approach. Curiosity, attention, and tenderness is what do you do? Beat it up? I've tried that. It doesn't work. Every time I try that approach, it gets me nowhere.
Better not to beat it up.
Better not to beat it up. Matt, it was so delightful having you here. Thank you for taking the time.
Scott, great to talk to you as always. I look forward to our next conversation, and
we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
Thank you again. Bye now.